Hello, everybody. How are y'all doing today? Good? Great. We're so excited to have you here for our really exciting special guest. They traveled a long way to be here today. And so it's so exciting you might be tempted to scream and yell and run up and down the aisles. But we ask that you please stay seated throughout the presentation. Please be very respectful to our guests. And save any questions you have in your mind. So they're going to come up and tell us a little about their journeys. They have some videos to share of some missions in space. And then there will be time for questions and answers afterwards. We have some questions you all submitted before the presentation, and we'll take questions that occur to you right now. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce two real actual astronauts, Dr. Kjell Lindgren and Dr. Jessica Watkins.
Well, thank you, Mitch. Thanks for that great introduction. We are so excited to be here, to have this opportunity to chat with you. I hope you'll forgive us if we run up and down the aisles in excitement. Okay, cool. We have just had the opportunity to embark and return from an incredible journey, a journey to the International Space Station, to spend 170 days doing science and research, to extend our presence in the solar system, and to make life better back here on Earth. And we're grateful to have the opportunity to share that with you all. Our journeys to that point, our journeys to the point of being selected as astronauts and then going through training differ pretty extensively. And the backgrounds that the astronauts within our office bring is very diverse and very interesting. And I think that it adds an incredible strength to our office for us to come through those various backgrounds. There may be some of you that want to join us to become astronauts and explore with us as we go on to the moon and to Mars. You may have already decided on a different goal, on a different destination, whether that's an engineer, a teacher, an artist, a physician. What we want to kind of, share with you up front is our own personal journeys that led us to this opportunity, and then after that, to share with you a video of our experiences, this last part of the journey, our experiences on the International Space Station. So I think Wadi's going to start and just share a little bit about her journey to the astronaut office.
Yeah, absolutely. We're super grateful to be here with you all today. It's a real pleasure to be able to be speaking with you. And yeah, I definitely want to echo what Kjell said about really just finding something that you love, that you are super passionate about. We talk about how all of us come from various different backgrounds and experiences, but the one thing that we all have in common is that when we leave behind our previous careers and come to be astronauts, there's a small part of us that's a little bit sad or a little bit misses that previous life, that previous career. And I think that speaks volumes about the fact that we've all found something that we love so much that even when we get the call to come be an astronaut and fly in space, that there's a little part of us that misses that career that we had. So there's just an encouragement to find for you whatever that thing is that you love so much. So for me, in terms of my background and what that path looked like for me, so I actually grew up in Boulder, so just down the street. I was born in Maryland, but did most of my growing up in Boulder. And I, even despite living right at the foothills and right by the mountains, I did not fall in love yet with geology. Geology is actually my background, but it's not where I started. So I went to undergraduate, went to school at Stanford, and I signed up to be a mechanical engineer, a mechanical engineering major. And the reason that I did that was because when I was probably about 9 or 10 was when I first kind of voiced a desire to be an astronaut. It was a dream that I had, as that was kind of when I found out that was a job you could have. You could go to space as your career, and so I wanted to do that. And so I thought that being an engineer was the only way to do that without being a military pilot. And so when I went to school, that's what I signed up to do. But I found out probably in a couple of years in that it wasn't something that I loved. I wasn't passionate about it. I honestly wasn't that great at it. And so it just was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so I kind of had this, kind of came to this crossroads where I had to decide, do I follow this path that is kind of the only path that I thought would lead me to this dream of mine, this goal that I had, or do I find something that I truly love and pursue that and to whatever end that ends up being. And so luckily for me, I found geology at that crossroads. I fell in love with the idea of being able to study the geology of another planet or planetary body. Especially I was super loved Mars, and so it was really neat to be able to study the surface of Mars. And so luckily for me, that actually ended up falling under both umbrellas. So of course, the requirement for this job is to just be in a STEM field. So anything in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, all of that counts. And so luckily for me, the thing that I found that was my passion and my love also was a qualifying pathway. But I learned a really important lesson about ensuring that I was pursuing something that I was really passionate about. And so I'm so grateful that geology was that for me. So I continued to study geology in undergrad, and then I went to graduate school at UCLA. And there I was able to finally study the geology of Mars. And so I looked at some large landslides that happen on the surface of Mars in a giant canyon called Valles Marineris. So I did that work, and then after that, I went to kind of across the city to Pasadena, where I studied. I worked on the Mars Science Laboratory Curiosity rover. So I was working with the rover, helping with the operations. So every day we were deciding where to take the rover, what data to take, and then also on the science side I was analyzing that data that the rover was sending back. So that was a really neat time. And throughout all of that, both undergraduate, grad school, I was doing internships as well. So I did several internships at different NASA centers that were close by to me at those times. And I'm really grateful for those experiences because I was able to get hands-on experience and just opportunities that I otherwise wouldn't have had that really helped me kind of shape what it was that I was interested in doing and finding the kind of pathway that I enjoyed pursuing. And so I would definitely encourage all of you to find opportunities like that that really allow you to investigate what it is that you're passionate about and to get experience with that. And the other piece of those internships was that they provided mentors to me. And those mentors were people that helped support and encourage me along the way. They helped me find these opportunities, and then they also helped me believe that I could achieve the things that I had set out, the goals that I had set for myself, and helped me find ways to do that along the way. So definitely encourage all of you to find those opportunities, find those mentors that will help you find your pathway and help you along it. From there, I was part of the class of 2017, selected to be a NASA astronaut candidate, and then a few years later was lucky enough to be assigned to a mission with Kjell here. So I think Kjell will tell you a little bit about his journey, and you'll notice that it's very different from mine. There's no one right answer or kind of checklist. So we hope that something in at least one of our stories or one of our colleagues' stories inspires you to find something that you loved as much as we do. Thanks.
Well, it's always fun for me to listen to Wadi's path, and really to hear the paths that so many of the folks that work at NASA, either in the astronaut office and the flight director office and mission controllers, the paths that they took to achieve their dream. For me, I will tell you that if all the laws of logic and reason applied, that I shouldn't be up here talking to you right now. I shouldn't be here sharing this experience of getting to fly on the space station, the opportunity to be an astronaut. really kind of an impossibility. But at NASA, we are in the business of making the impossible possible. And I'll share this story with you. So I've wanted to be an astronaut for as long as I can remember. I grew up loving science fiction, reading books, watching movies like Star Wars. I remember one of the books that inspired me was Runaway Robot, about a kid living on Ganymede, one of the moons of Jupiter, that had a robot friend. And I thought that would be super cool to live on Ganymede and have a robot. But it wasn't until April 12th of 1981 that when Mrs. Loudon, my second grade teacher, wheeled a television into our second grade classroom at New Baden Elementary School, and we watched the space shuttle launch. And then it clicked for me that this was a reality. This is something that you could do, that you could actually live and work in space. And so I was hooked. There's no internet back in those days, so how do I figure out how to become an astronaut? So I read books, accounts from our early astronauts, and all of those astronauts from Mercury and Gemini and Apollo programs were pilots and test pilots. And so I decided, if I want to be an astronaut, that's the path that I've got to take. And if I want to be a pilot, I want to join the Air Force. And if I'm going to join the Air Force, I want to go to the Air Force Academy. And so I found a little card, an information card in an Air Force magazine, and I sent that off to the Air Force Academy saying, I want to learn more about the Air Force Academy. And I never heard back from them. It was probably because I was 11 at the time. We were living in England. But I kept that dream alive. And I worked hard. We moved back. My dad was in the Air Force at the time. We moved back to the U.S., and I graduated from high school in Virginia and had the great privilege of being accepted into the class of 1995 at the Air Force Academy. So I was on that path that I had kind of built for myself. Everything was going according to plan. Had a little bit of an epiphany like Jessica's, where I went there thinking I needed to be an astronautical engineer major. And so I was really good at math in high school. I placed out of math at the academy and found myself in Calculus 3, and that was a little bit of a struggle. I wasn't having fun, but I was taking biology at the time, and I absolutely loved that. And so I decided that I was going to switch majors to biology. And I studied pre-med because I just wanted to have some options in the future, not really planning on becoming a doctor at that point. But that's what I studied. And once I graduated from the academy, I went on to graduate school to just immerse myself in the discipline of cardiovascular physiology, trying to understand how weightlessness affects the human body. It was a joy to get to study the things that I wanted to study. And after finishing that, I went to pilot training. So I was on a path, that same path that I had planned out for myself, to become a pilot and then maybe someday become an astronaut. This was the beginning of a dream come true, to be able to fly for the Air Force. Well, about a third of the way through, I was doing really well, but I went to see the flight surgeon, the doctor, because I thought I had a cold. And he hemmed and hawed and tapped his chin and said, we need to do more testing. And so I got pulled out of pilot training so that the Air Force could do more testing because he thought I had asthma. 6 months of testing, I was waiting, and during that time I felt like I had we call it casual status, so I just had kind of a job to spend my time. But during that time I thought, there is no way that they're going to pull me out of the cockpit for good. But the Air Force is a large organization. It doesn't necessarily have the individual interests at heart. And so I thought, I want to have something that I can present to the Air Force and say I can do this instead. And so I started taking MCAT prep courses, preparing for the entrance exams, and I started applying to medical schools, fully thinking that I would get back into the cockpit, get back to flying. Well, at the end of that 6 months, the Air Force held a medical evaluation board for me, and not only did they decide that I wasn't going to fly anymore, they decided to kick me out of the Air Force. So, in my mind, there is no line that connects being medically kicked out of the Air Force to someday becoming an astronaut. Zero. So that represented the complete obliteration of a dream, of not only becoming an astronaut, but even just becoming a pilot. And that was the end of over a decade of work, even at that point. So I liken that to descending into a valley of despair. That was a dark time for me. What am I going to do now? So I leaned on family, friends, and my faith to kind of work through that and figure out what was next. I remember the day that my pilot training class, all of my friends in that class graduated. That was a bittersweet day as I saw them get their pilot wings and decide what aircraft they were going to go on to fly. I felt like I should have been there with them. It was sad. Extremely happy for them, but sad for that lost future. The very next day, my wife and I decided we were going to go hang out at a coffee shop over the week for that Saturday. We stopped by the mailbox on the way to the coffee shop, and inside the mailbox was a big letter, a big package from the University of Colorado School of Medicine, accepting me into the 2002 class. So hard work had paid off, and I had an alternate path, one that challenged me and one that I felt like I could still serve in the community. And so medicine became the next trajectory for me. So I finished school at the University of Colorado here in Denver. I went on to train in emergency medicine up in Minnesota. And as a part of that training program, we work in the hyperbaric chamber, taking care of critical care patients that maybe have been exposed to carbon monoxide or diving injury. You can't dive in the hyperbaric chamber, though, and have asthma. And so I got tested again. And they said, "You don't have asthma." I thought, huh. So I got tested several other times and cleared of that diagnosis. And for me, that opened the door for an opportunity to maybe still participate in human spaceflight. And so after finishing emergency medicine, I went down to study aerospace medicine and got a job as a flight surgeon at NASA, taking care of the crews that are preparing to fly to the space station. And then a year into that job, they held another astronaut selection, and I got selected into the class of 2009, the 20th astronaut group. So the reason I share that story with you is because there will be obstacles in your path. You may have already encountered them, and if you haven't, they are out there. There will be challenges, seemingly insurmountable. But with family, with your friends, with whatever that you lean upon, you can work your way through that. With hard work, I'll tell you, this opportunity of getting to become astronauts, it required hard work and some luck. Nobody told me when the Air Force is getting ready to kick me out to start taking night classes, hour and a half, twice a week, and to study every night for 3 hours. Nobody told me to apply to medical schools. But because I had invested that hard work, I had invested in my future, I had that opportunity ahead of me. Hard work will open doors. If your goal is to become an astronaut, hard work will get you to the threshold of that opportunity, and then it requires a little bit of luck along with that. But if you invest in that hard work, you're going to discover other opportunities along the way. There have been people that have applied to the astronaut office who have been invited to interviews, but because of the hard work they had invested, there were other better opportunities for them, and they declined to come interview with us because of the hard work that they had invested. They found another opportunity that was even better. Hard work will open doors and create opportunities for yourself. And so what we'd like to do now is share a little bit of the doors that hard work opened up for us over the course of our preparations for this journey to the International Space Station. So the journey to becoming an astronaut and the journey to prepare and fly to space is not an individual accomplishment. It is a reflection of the investment of the time and hard work of so many others, mentors, coaches, teachers, friends, family. And in the case of a space flight, it reflects the investment of our trainers, instructors, our crewmates, and mission controllers. All to the point where a week prior to our launch, we make our way out to Kennedy Space Center. We get to see our rocket, we put on our spacesuits, and prepare for our mission to the International Space Station.
Crew-4 astronauts getting their spacesuits on, set to launch to the International Space Station. And this is a live look inside that suit-up room where the crew of 3 Americans and 1 European astronaut are completing their checkouts. There they are.
There they are.
The astronauts of Crew-4 getting ready to go to space, taking their first steps outside. From left to right, Jessica Watkins, Bob Hines, Kjell Lindgren, and Samantha Cristoforetti.
What do we got here?
1, 2, 3, 4! So absolutely amazing to walk out of that historic building, to wave one last time to our friends and family, to climb into these vehicles and to be escorted out in the pitch black night and to see our ride, our rocket, standing there gleaming under xenon lights. And then to cross the crew arm and to get strapped into the vehicle for our journey to low Earth orbit.
Good luck, Godspeed, time to let freedom fly.
Copy SpaceX. We'd like to take this opportunity to extend our thanks to our NASA, SpaceX, international partner teams, and most of all our families for getting us to the threshold of this amazing opportunity to launch to the International Space Station from Kennedy Space Center. Heartfelt thank you to every one of you that made this possible. Now, let's let Falcon roar and freedom ring.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. And liftoff. Go Falcon. Let freedom ring. Godspeed, crew.
Now, we've been told that it was an incredible experience to watch our rocket claw its way up into the night sky, visible for all the way until we had separation of our first stage. Even more incredible to be on that vehicle.
For joining us on the Crew Dragon Freedom. We enjoyed showing you around our home for the next few hours. We're looking forward to docking with Space Station and sharing more of our work and the amazing science and research that we have the opportunity to do with you over the coming months. So thanks so much, and Crew Dragon Freedom signing off.
So believe it or not, it just takes 8.5 minutes. 8.5 minutes to get from Earth to low Earth orbit, from Earth to weightlessness, to go from 0 miles per hour to 17,500 miles per hour, 5 miles a second. And then for us, another 16 hours to catch up with the space station.
Capture and docking confirmed with the International Space Station flying 261 statute miles over the central Pacific Ocean.
Dragon hatch is open and they are welcoming the Crew-4.
I like to call this a ballistic entry.
You see all smiles around as Jessica Watkins, Bob Hines, Samantha Cristoforetti ingressed, and last one in we see Commander of Dragon, Kjell Lindgren, now entering into the International Space Station.
So the reason that we go to the International Space Station, this orbiting laboratory, is to do science. We are able to take advantage of the microgravity environment that the ISS provides to do all different types of science. We can do material science. So you see Kjell here working in a glove box where we can keep all of our scientific materials contained in microgravity. I'm here working in a combustion chamber, so essentially a furnace, looking at how different materials burn at different temperatures and how flames behave differently in microgravity. We are also able to do fluid dynamics, so looking at how fluids behave differently when we remove gravity from the whole equation. And the really neat part about doing science on the ISS is that we are able to be kind of the hands, eyes, and ears of the scientific team of experts on the ground who have prepared these experiments for us and help walk us through conducting them on their behalf. We also do human research, so we become the test subjects ourselves as we look at the effects of long-duration spaceflight on the human body and the human brain. Here we're looking at some of the effects on our vision and our eyes while we're in space. Here I'm doing cell biology, so looking at human immune cells through a microscope, looking at how the process of aging of those immune cells with applications to back here on the ground, trying to find pathways to prevent or at least slow down that aging process to make life better here back on Earth. We're also able to use the outside environment of the ISS to do science. So here we're preparing the Japanese airlock with nanosatellites, so small CubeSats that are packed full of science that we then can deploy out into the space environment. And what's really neat about these is that we're able to partner with some of our commercial and industry partners, but also our university and school partners as well. So we're able to get students involved in some of the science that we're doing on ISS. Pretty fun to watch them deploy out the window. We also participate in several technology demonstrations, so helping to develop technology that will pave the way to the moon and eventually to Mars. We are looking at robotics here that can help assist crew members on different missions. And then one of our favorites is this one where we are growing plants. But instead of the normal way of doing it with soil, we are investigating ways to grow plants without soil. Because soil is actually a real burden because it's heavy and it's hard to contain. And so we are using what are called hydroponic and aeroponic techniques to learn how to grow crops in environments where soil we're not able to bring soil. Once we're complete with that science, we'll take samples, so both from our human bodies as well as from the science that we're doing, and we preserve and freeze those samples on board until it's time to send them back down to the ground where teams of scientists and experts can do further analysis with their instrumentation and expertise here on the ground.
Now, speaking of those cargo vehicles that bring those samples to the ground, we had a number of vehicles visit the space station during our time on orbit. On the far left, you can see the Cygnus cargo vehicle on an Antares rocket. In the middle, a Russian Progress cargo vehicle, and on the far right, a SpaceX Cargo Dragon. We'll talk about the Cargo Dragon first. So it launches and then will autonomously dock with the space station. And once it docks, it represents a very busy time for us. Imagine a moving truck pulling up to your front door, and you've got to unload that whole thing in the matter of days, and make sure you put it in a place so that that you know where it is in the future. And unfortunately, we didn't unload it quite this fast. But it's a lot of hard work, and at the end of it, we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. We get some fresh fruit with a lot of these cargo vehicles, and that is a real treat, a real taste of home. Once that cargo vehicle is empty, we will load it with broken equipment, like this failed spacesuit. And we'll also load it with some of those scientific samples that Jessica talked about. We'll pull those out of cold storage, load those into the vehicle, and once this spacecraft undocks, it will do its deorbit burn. It will enter the Earth's atmosphere, put out parachutes, and then land softly in the water. SpaceX recovery forces will pick it up, move it to land, and that sets off a whole logistics chain of where all the samples, the scientific samples that we've collected, will be distributed to the scientific labs across the country and the world. Now, another cargo vehicle is the Cygnus. It actually will launch and then fly right next to the space station. We'll use the robotic arm to grab it and attach it to the space station. Now, this was already up there when we arrived. It had already been unpacked. And for this vehicle, we're actually loading it with trash because it's going to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. And we have the distinction of being the trashiest crew on the space station. We hold the record for the most trash loaded into one of these cargo vehicles, and we were very proud of that. We were scrambling all over the space station, finding every scrap of trash that we could load in there. And then it will, we release it, we detach it and release it from the space station. And unlike the Dragon, which will return to the Earth, again, this will burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. And so it looks like a micrometeorite or a meteorite or a shooting star. But just remember that one person's shooting star may be another person's dirty laundry. So be careful what you wish upon. During our mission, we also had the privilege of welcoming the Boeing Starliner. So we launched on a SpaceX Crew Dragon. Our partner vehicle is this Boeing Starliner, and that represents another way to get our astronauts to and from the space station. We were very excited to see it approach, and this was a tremendous test. The first time that this vehicle had launched, done docking and rendezvous, and docked with the space station. And we were the first crew to get to actually interact with this vehicle on orbit. So the space station is not only our office and our laboratory, it's also our home, and we like to have a little bit of fun. Here's Samantha as Wonder Woman, and Jessica as an amazing Spider-Woman. Our friend Bob as Superman. And here I am as Wonder Woman in my invisible jet. So weightlessness is amazing, and it's truly incredible to us how quickly our brains adapt to that. The novelty wears off, but this ability to take advantage of this environment and do things that we could never do on the ground is absolutely amazing. To move around like this, to do backflips and front flips, and then to see basic fundamental physics at work, to watch water assume the shape of a sphere, and then to get to play around with it a little bit, to have this bubble of water, and then to blow a bubble of air into the bubble of water, and to see how the refraction of light changes with that. We're also cognizant that we are surrounded by electronics, so we are trying to be very good stewards of the environment that we're in. We never, ever mess around with each other during PAO events. And as my kids have taught me, if it's funny the first time, it's funny the second time.
One of our favorite games to play on board.
Not sure how I came to become the object for that game. But it's not all games. We work from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening, 5 days a week. And part of that workday is exercise. We exercise for 2.5 hours every day because it turns out that weightlessness is incredibly hard on the human body. It's as if instead of being in space for 6 months, we were laying flat in bed for 6 months, which results in bone demineralization, muscle atrophy, and a weakening of the cardiovascular system or the heart. And so we have 3 countermeasures, 3 exercises to maintain our health. The treadmill and the exercise bike for aerobic fitness, and this amazing machine called the ARED, the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, which provides up to 600 pounds of resistance through evacuated cylinders, and it can be reconfigured like a universal gym to allow us to do squats and deadlift and reverse deadlift to load our bones to maintain bone health and to help us to maintain muscle strength. Now this is, we celebrated Wattie's birthday within days of getting on orbit, and so I made her a birthday cake using maple muffin top, vanilla pudding, and rehydrated fruit.
It was delicious.
It was really, really good. But it really underscores how important food is to our nutrition, but also for psychological reasons. We use food to celebrate, to commiserate, and to bond over meals and share our experiences throughout the expedition.
But probably our favorite place to spend time, even over the dining room table, is this, the cupola, with 7 windows that open up to the Earth rotating below. So one of the most important uses of the cupola is doing what you saw me doing there, making scientific observations. From the cupola, we're able to observe different geologic features and formations, surface processes and how they change over time. We're even able to see natural hazards, so things like hurricanes and fires and volcanic eruptions as they occur during our increment. And what's really neat, especially, is to be able to kind of see the Earth from an orbital perspective, kind of a planetary perspective, and then marry that with our perspective on the ground, so data field work that we can do in those locations on the ground. And that will be very similar to how we'll operate on the lunar surface when we go back to the moon here shortly with the Artemis program. But it is really, just such a privilege to be able to take photographs of our unique vantage point on the ISS and share it with everybody here back on Earth. It is our way of connecting with humanity and to really be able to put the human back in human spaceflight. The night sky is equally as gorgeous as the daytime. Being able to see the stars in the backdrop of the limb of the Earth. We're able to see city lights and lightning storms, thunderstorms that sometimes span across continents. Just absolutely gorgeous. Some of our favorite times as a crew were when we just gathered together in the cupola and watched the world go by. Often just in stunned silence at just in awe of how beautiful our home is. We also had the privilege of being on board during some times of high solar activity, which creates these geomagnetic storms that produce these absolutely phenomenal aurora. And sometimes these aurora even extended down to low enough latitudes that our orbit on the ISS essentially flew right through them. And so we were able to be in the cupola and essentially just watch the aurora dance around us. Just absolutely incredible.
It is the only thing looking out the window that gave me goosebumps on the space station. That may have also been because of the increased radiation that we were receiving, but nonetheless.
But alas, all good things must come to an end. So on October 14th of last year, after 170 days in space, it was time for us to say goodbye to our Crew-5 colleagues who had come up and hand over the keys of station to them and don our suits and ingress Dragon one more time. Once we undocked from station, we got a beautiful flyover over station as we said goodbye to our home for the past 6 months. It was definitely bittersweet. But the trip home was pretty quick as compared to our rendezvous. It actually only took us less than 5 hours to get back home, which was actually the fastest return by a U.S. vehicle off of station. And I'll tell you that it felt fast as well. We were really cooking. At about half the altitude of space station, we were going 2 miles per second faster than space station, which, as Kjell mentioned, is already going at 17,500 miles per hour. So we're definitely moving fast. And when you're moving that fast, creating through the atmosphere, the most beautiful sight you can see is this: 4 good parachutes, because you know that's going to slow you down to a safe speed for splashdown. We splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean, first crew to do that since Apollo 9. And then the SpaceX recovery ship comes and picks us up using the crane on the back of the ship, plops us down on the back, and then opens the hatch for the first time, and we get our first breath of fresh air. You see the flight surgeon coming in, checking on us, making sure we're all feeling good, and we were. So we each, one by one, came out of the capsule. We were taken to a med bay, do a little bit more testing and checking up on us before taking us on a helicopter that then took us to an airplane that took us to Houston with the moon in the background there as a nod to our next destination. here in Houston. This is where we're based out of. And that is where the first time we were able to say hello and thank you to all of our friends and family and colleagues and management, everyone who had helped make the mission possible in the first place and successful, as well as people who held down the fort for us while we were gone. So we're really grateful that they were able to come out in the middle of the night and give us a chance to say thank you.
So we wish you all the best on your journeys. Thank you for being a part of ours.
Thank you so much. And now we have some time for questions. And we have questions that a lot of you submitted beforehand, but also, you all just saw an amazing presentation. You probably have questions. We have a couple of roving microphones. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and we'll find you with a microphone. But first of all, one of our pre-submitted questions, what is it like to sleep in space, and do you still dream?
I'll take this one because you saw us being
Jessica is our resident expert in sleep.
It is my superpower. That is definitely true. Yes. So sleeping on station. So you saw us messing around with Kjell in the blue sleeping bags. So those are sleeping bags. They're usually inside of our crew quarters when you're not messing around. And so inside of our crew quarters, people do different things. Some people like to have the sleeping bag strapped down, kind of all the way down against the wall. It helps to kind of provide the sensation that maybe you're laying down with a little bit of pressure, like you're in a bed. But for me, and I think for Kjell as well, we actually just like to have it be connected to the wall so you're not floating around inside of your crew quarters, but have your legs free floating. And so your legs would kind of float up like this. You kind of curl up, get nice and cozy, and it's like sleeping on a cloud. But some people definitely have a little bit more trouble, and so we have some medications to help with that, and it definitely, over time, people get used to it. For the dreams part of the question, for me, probably about 3 months in onto our stay on board, I noticed that I was having dreams where everyone was floating. So they weren't necessarily taking place in space, like we weren't on space station or anything, but everyone was floating, so we must have been in space. So that was kind of interesting. But I haven't had any of those since I've been back, so I guess my brain has figured out that I'm back on Earth.
We have a question over here.
We were just wondering how you took showers.
That's a great question. So all of the things that you do on Earth, we have to do in space, floating. And so showers is one of the challenging things that we have to do every day. Actually, for our first space station, Skylab, we tested out a real kind of a shower setup. So there was this collapsible tube that you lifted up from the floor and locked into the ceiling, and then you had like a water gun on a hose that you would spray. And that's how you would clean up. There's a great picture of Pete Conrad, like peeking over the top of that cylinder. It turned out that when you shoot that water all over the place, surface tension takes over. There's no gravity, there's no airstream, and so water just kind of adheres to you, adheres to the screen, and it turns out that it took longer to clean up the shower than it did to actually clean off. And so we kind of abandoned that idea. And so for space station now, we actually have these towels that are impregnated with a little bit of soap, and we'll add hot water to that towel and then use those towels to basically, they're kind of like sponge or towel baths. It is less pleasant than it sounds. The space station is actually fairly cold. There's a constant ventilation, and so that towel stays hot for about 10 seconds, and then you're taking a cold towel bath, which also sounds it's worse than it sounds too. So that's how we shower in space.
All right. Do astronauts ever get sick while in space, and what happens?
So the answer is yes. There is a syndrome or a situation called space motion sickness or space adaptation syndrome. And so about 70% of first-time flyers, when they get into low Earth orbit, and really when they get into the wider volume of the space station, they start to feel nauseated, they start to feel motion sick. And so for my first mission, when I got up on the space station, and of course our space station, we have international partners, And I flew on a Soyuz, a Russian rocket, for my first mission. And when we arrived, my crewmate, he wasn't feeling too great, and so he went straight to his crew quarters and took a nap. And I was feeling great. And my Russian colleagues were like, "You look great." And I said, "I feel great." And they're like, "Hey, let's celebrate." And so we went to the galley, and we were just eating, and I was like, "This is awesome." And then I went to sleep, and then when I woke up, I felt terrible. And I proceeded to throw up for 2 days. I used up all of the emesis bags on the space station. So now there is an emesis bag pantry that I think is named after me. But after that, I felt great. And then there are some folks that when they come home, they actually feel bad. So they may feel great when they arrive, but when getting back to Earth and getting back to gravity, they feel really bad. And gratefully, I think across our crew, we all felt great when we got home. The second time, this most recent mission, I felt fine arriving into orbit. And so I think that your body kind of remembers that you're making this transition. So that's kind of the motion sickness part. One of the great things about being on the space station is, one, you directly see the effects of the germ theory. And so that is, if nobody around you has a cold, you can't get a cold because there's not a virus to transmit. And so we practice quarantine measures. Unfortunately, we're all familiar with that now, having gone through COVID. But 2 weeks prior to our launch, we have to quarantine ourselves so that when we launch and get to the space station, we're not carrying colds with us up into space. And that's how we keep our astronauts, our crews on the space station healthy. And so one of my favorite things about being on the space station is that, especially coming from Houston, is that on the space station, it's always 72 degrees. You don't get colds, you don't get mosquito bites, and you don't get fire ant bites. So it's pretty good living.
We have a question over here.
If you drew a paper airplane in space, would it keep going or would it stop right there? And how long would it take it to stop?
So we actually had the exact same question, and so we tried it.
Yeah. Sure. So what do you think is going to happen? It'll keep going?
Yeah, it will keep going.
Yeah, it's a great theory, and I think that if we didn't have ventilation, so if we didn't have fans blowing, that there's a good possibility it would keep going. But even if you make a good paper airplane, I think it'll work pretty well. Unfortunately, our engineering skills were pretty poor, and so just the motion of the airplane flying through the atmosphere that we have on the space station, the wings are exerting pressure and causing it to divert. And I don't think any of our airplanes really went further than 10 feet. They ran into a wall or dove towards the ground. And gravity actually helps to generate some of that. So the absence of gravity just kind of made it like an exercise in futility. It was a great hypothesis, great question, and it was really cool that we got to practice that on the space station.
How is it like to adjust back to gravity?
Yeah, so definitely your body has to get used to it when you're coming back to gravity. You feel very heavy because you've been floating around without gravity for so long and you've gotten used to that. So you come back, you feel very heavy. We do some kind of tests when we get back to see how we're doing and how we progress over time. And there's one little test that we do where there's just small little hurdles, just about this tall. And we kind of set them up, and we have to just step over them. It seems very simple, right? Just step over them like this. And the first day or two, when we come back, we try to step over them, and we kick it over. We try to stay like, okay, I'm going to lift my leg up higher this time, right? Again, you kick it down. And so it's just because your feet just feel really, really heavy, and your body almost just does not know how to put in the right amount of force to do the right action. We also talk about your brain is trying to figure out how to balance, because when you're in space, there's no need to kind of balance your body. And so there's some huge adjustment there too. When you get back, we experienced that you would kind of start falling, starting to be off balance, and your brain, you would know that you're falling. You'd say, hey brain, we're falling, like, let's do something about this. And it just, your neurons don't fire fast enough to do anything about it. And so you just know you're falling and you just fall over because your foot won't come out to save you. So it's definitely a weird sensation where your mind is lucid, you know what's happening, but you are not able to physically do what needs to happen. But that only lasts for a couple days. Your brain figures it out pretty quickly. And as Kjell mentioned, our bodies are actually pretty strong and fit when we get back because of all the exercise that we've done while we're on board. So once we get past those kind of initial reactions to gravity, we're generally in pretty good shape.
The bottom line is gravity's a bummer.
Is it hard to breathe because of how high you are?
That's a great question. For those of us that are coming from Houston and coming to Colorado, you certainly feel that it's a little bit hard to breathe because the air is rare. But we actually keep our spacecraft and the space station at mean sea level pressure. So that is 14.7 pounds per square inch of atmospheric pressure. That is what we keep the space station at and our spacecraft at as well. And so it turns out that it actually isn't harder to breathe. You've got plenty of oxygen as if you were at sea level on the Earth.
The one part about the air that we breathe that is kind of like here in Denver, though, is that it can be very dry. So the airflow that we create is built to kind of take out some of the moisture in the air because we don't want to have any mildew or things like that build up on station. So it's a little bit desiccating or drying out. And so you start to feel that a little bit. You need a little bit more lotion, just like you do when you're here in Denver.
We can take one last question.
How many people were on the ISS when you were there?
Yeah, so on our crew, we are Crew-4 that launched on the Crew Dragon. There are 4 of us, so myself and Kjell, and then we had Bob Hines, who was actually my classmate. We were selected at the same time. He was our pilot on the Dragon. And then Samantha Cristoforetti is an Italian astronaut. She's an astronaut through the European Space Agency, and she was our 4th member. So there's the 4 of us. And then on the Russian segment of the ISS, which is connected to the US side, that we had 3 Russian colleagues, 3 cosmonauts who are up there as well. And so it's the 7 of us who are up there most of the time. But at the beginning and at the end, there's the previous crew is still there. And so there's some overlap there where it gets to be pretty crowded on station, up to 11 of us on board at a time for a short period.
Yeah, I think that's it for our questions. Again, thank you so much for your enthusiasm. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your great questions. We wish you all the best on your journeys. Thank you.
Thank you.